Hi, guys. So it is 5:30. So we will open the Stockbridge Goals Stewardship Commission meeting. It is August 22nd, 2024, and I call the meeting to order. Can we accept the minutes from August 8th that Dawn prepared? A motion?
I'll make motion.
So Sally and second?
second.
Tom seconds. So the minutes are approved.
Thank you.
Any updates from Zebra Mussel Station? Okay.
Just one concern, we've seen an article in the paper that noted does have zebra mussels now
Yeah,
from the
I saw that.
DCR.
was that a notice?
Mhm.
Okay.
And probably Pontusic will follow fairly quickly because it's so close. I don't know what we can do other than what we're doing right now. The only concern I have is the town beach people putting it in the causeway.
Right.
And at this late in the year, I don't think there's anything we can do, but over the winter, I think we're gonna have to think about getting somebody over there.
I think so too.
We'll
Really?
have to talk to the powers that be at the beach.
Parks and Rec.
Gary, what time do your guys start?
7.
7? Because I see fishermen really
Oh, yeah,
early.
they're out.
Very early.
They-
they're out
And I
for-
just wondering if,
Yeah.
we're missing some of the fishermen that come really early.
We've been doing this for 15 years now. The fishermen are not really to be worried about. They're the
Okay.
ones that are more concerned than we are
Okay, good.
because they want to keep the habitat.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
It's the casual boater that just comes in, from on a vacation someplace that happened to be in the Hudson River yesterday or the Finger Lakes or something like that.
Okay.
Those are what we're concerned about. And it's very random. It can be 1 in 1,000,
Right. And 7 to what time in the day?
5 or 6. If it's busy, they'll stay to 6. If
Okay.
it's not,
Okay. Tom, any announcements from the associations? Because I thought you were.
Yes, we've got signs up. I never heard back from the Mackinac Terrace.
Oh,
Um,
I'm not surprised.
really?
I live there.
Oh.
Oh. but the sign, I've seen the sign that they put up we have one up at Shores. I've seen one that they put up at, White Pine.
You can just walk around the corner and just give me this.
All right.
I'll make sure it gets up.
Okay.
Okay,
One's
thank
up
you,
at both of
Lois.
them.
And the ones up, yeah, and great. So, yeah, and then the ones up what I have to do is go by and trim the bushes probably by the causeway and by the,
Should we
waterfall.
ask you?
we're in the causeway.
Have to do it.
Yeah, there's one on each end. isn't there?
Yeah, I just need to go,
Yeah.
the bushes grow over, so I just need to trim the bushes.
No, I'll stop. Give me your address. I'll stop by.
Any,
I
Tom,
I
you
got
have anything?
a few
Go ahead.
things. Yeah. All right, so we had this map, I guess it is. Rachel, you have a copy of it right there, from Parks and Recreation, and we had some questions. I mean, is that on what the status of that is and
I don't think they've met again to talk about it, but I think we could get an update for next meeting. Would that be useful?
Are they asking our input? Or I wasn't clear when we said we're going to discuss, you said we'll discuss this later. Wasn't clear what our role is in
So,
this.
at their meeting, they discussed it, which was the night before ours, and then they gave me a copy. So it hasn't come up again, but it's sort of like in there. So I am sure they're going to ask for our opinion or our recommendation or our support.
Can you refresh my memory, which seems to be
You,
drawing a complete blank?
were you,
you weren't.
You weren't here.
You weren't here.
That's probably why
At the end of
That's why you
Lake,
have a blank.
that's for Mike.
on the south end of Lake Drive, where the causeway is, the spillway, sorry, they are considering putting in
No, I was here for that.
Oh, you were?
yeah,
Okay,
then
So
you,
moving
Cataracts,
the
yeah.
cataracts over by Don's, that
right.
little area where they put the new bridge.
Right. My concern is that, when I went home and then looked at this more closely, it's a 5-foot wide gravel path. I mean, I kayak down there and I walk down there. It is deserted and there's nobody there. And some Yahoo could easily try to get their boat, in there because there's a parking lot. And especially with our heightened awareness of the concern around zebra mussels, I just think it's not a great idea. It's not a great solution. In addition to people with their kayaks on the current kayak racks at the beach aren't going to want to have to kayak for half a mile before they get to the main part of the lake.
You're saying people could put them in
Could put other boats in there.
at the waterfall.
Right, because right now there's it ain't, right, you have to go up, you have to walk up to be able to
Yeah,
get to, and if they're gonna open up a 5 foot wide at least path, then it'd be much easier to get boats in
Can
there.
they even do that? Because isn't it a dam?
Huh?
It would be like up ahead, sort of.
Yeah, they
By the
frame up the
parking
berm.
By the parking lot. So they, I guess they would cut
Not too
through,
often, not too often. Every now and then we see one.
so, anyway, that's my opinion.
I think that sounds good.
I had something else.
Go ahead, Don.
About idea.
Okay, so,
I'm
several meetings ago, this is old businessy stuff. Several meetings ago, we unanimously said we would suggest to the select board that they appoint somebody in lieu of Roxanne to be on this committee that's working on the dredging project. And have they done that? Do you know?
Well, there's going to be a big change on that. So,
Big change on that.
yeah, so I think don't have to worry about it anymore.
Okay,
Okay.
would you like to clue us in on the big change?
Because it hasn't been
Huh?
it hasn't been given to the public yet, so no. So,
Okay, forget
move
it.
on.
And concerning the dogs versus the zebra mussel thingy. I mean, does anybody want to take that on as a project? I mean, I kind of do a lot on this commission anyway, so I was wondering, there was some sort of mixed feelings that it was possibly, the last letter that you read at the last meeting ended with, from, what was her name?
Leah.
Yeah. Said that the problem was doing it in Stockbridge Bowl.
Right.
That there wasn't enough volume, but missed was the point that we never intended, I don't think, to do it only us, that we would ask other towns to participate as well, and possibly even the state. But I don't know, is this going too far? Should we just forget it?
Well, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's a good idea. And I think it's a valuable thing, a tool to have for the county. But maybe not just for us, which
No, it
was
wouldn't.
what we talked about in the first place. But I think that it's something that I don't know if Leah has a facility. I know that she certainly is a very knowledgeable trainer. If there were a facility, I think that would be something that maybe could be undertaken over the winter, because it would be, at least a couple of months of training of the
Sure.
dogs to make sure that they knew what they were supposed to do, and then they could start up in the spring. But I think there's a lot of legwork that has to happen first, like now that there seem to be zebra mussels in Anota and probably soon Pontusic, are other communities willing to help fund the training of the dogs?
Sure.
Are there people with dogs who are interested in doing it? It's a process that you can't just sort of say, okay, I went to the training and now I'm done. You have to keep up with the training.
Darren, at one point you mentioned that Moose might be into, I talked to him, he was really into it.
His wife is.
Leah is his wife.
Okay, well, either way, that maybe he would be interested in heading this up, I don't know.
She basically summed it up in the letter. That the dogs would become bored and, there's not enough activity for them. They're not going to be finding what they're looking for.
Even if it was for the entire, all the lake.
Unless we send them over to Laurel Lake and Anota once in a while.
Of course.
Practice.
Yeah, well, I would assume they would be part of the process, part of the group.
I think, like I said in the beginning, I think on paper, it sounds good. But I think the reality of it is making it happen is going to be very difficult.
Okay.
I mean, I think you'd have to get with all the lake associations and and gauge their interest, because Leah's right. If your dog isn't finding anything, gets bored. But if you were taking your dogs to Anota and to Pontusic and to Laurel Lake and they were finding what they were looking for and getting rewarded for it, if you just go and it's like having a blank room, you can't have more than one or they just lose their interest.
Well, the next step would have been to invite several people to just speak to us about this, and I think we'll go ahead and do that. Is that okay?
I think the fact that Enota's gotten zebra mussels may awaken some people, so.
Okay.
We know who is it? Does Anota have a lake association?
No, well, they've got the harbor master for Pittsfield.
Okay,
Yeah, there's the Anota Lake Protective Association.
okay. Maybe we
I've
could,
worked with them.
Thank you.
maybe we could write them a letter and, or,
Appreciate it.
get a hold of, figure out who the lake associations are. Because there
So we're gonna,
used to be the lake.
Later.
okay.
Lake and pond
Oh, Lapa.
group, yeah.
So
Are they still in
They're still
existence?
active.
Once a lake already has zebra mussels, you don't need to test anymore, right? Because
No.
it doesn't matter
Now
if the
you-
boats are going in.
Now you want to wash the boats when they come out.
Right, but you don't need the dogs to test the boats going in
No.
because they're going into a zebra laden
Right.
lake.
So they won't be interested.
Right.
Dogs will be interested.
Yeah, but
The dogs will be interested, but it's not, it doesn't serve a purpose.
Correct.
Know the lake anymore.
Right, and
Or
then you
Laurel
don't
Lake.
want to.
Right.
Unless they were somehow successful in eradicating them, in which case.
Right.
Okay, folks, we have
We have a guest.
a guest
So,
waiting.
Charlie Kenny is here, so I'd like him to be able to speak and have time. So Charlie, the floor is yours.
We can't hear you, Charlie.
Charlie?
Charlie?
Can you hear me now?
Now, well, now you're
Okay,
good.
sorry. Thank you, Jamie, and good evening, everybody. I'm back again with the idea of developing a protocol for a delimited advisory for the lake instead of following the current DPH protocol, which says if there's a cyanobacteria bloom, we should issue an advisory and close the entire lake like we did a couple of years ago. I'm working on the idea of developing a protocol to issue a limited advisory. In other words, we wouldn't close the whole lake. And what I've sent you, I hope everybody has it, is a tentative decision tree for that advisory. Just to give you a little bit of background on it, I have spoken to academics and government officials in Washington State, Wisconsin, New York State, and Massachusetts. And as far as I can tell from all the stuff I've looked at, and I think that this is pretty reliable, there is not a current kind of advisory such as I'm talking about. In other words, even though some of the states allow lakes that to have an advisory, to put out a limited advisory, they don't have a studied or scientific basis for figuring out how to do it. They sort of eyeball it. They say, all right, this is where the bloom is, don't go there. And the rest of the lake, they leave alone. But understanding these are big lakes, some of them, they're very big. So if just, for example, Cayuga is about 40 miles long, I believe, and they have blooms sometimes down in the inlet down at the very bottom, and they will sometimes close that area up, but they don't say anything about the rest of the lake. But there's no basis for that. Now, the bowl, of course, is much smaller. And so if we were to issue a limited advisory, there would be the possibility of there being some kind of danger for people. We don't want that to be the case. So what I'm about is figuring out how to set up a protocol that will eliminate that danger. And I have spoken to Logan Bailey from the Department of Public Health of Massachusetts. He's in charge of cyanobacteria bloom management, and he's very interested in the idea. And he will be willing to look at the protocol that we put together and pass judgment on it to help us out with that. And I suspect it probably, if it's done well, that it will pass muster and it could possibly be passed on to other lakes, although lakes are very limnologically specific. I've asked Dr. Ben Burpee from GZA to be here tonight, and he's going to help me out by explaining some of the things some of the details that I'm going to skip over. I'm going to try to be brief about this to give him a chance to get in on it. But my basic goals tonight are, first of all, to explain to you what the tentative decision tree and protocol is going to be, so you understand what it is and you can comment on it and think about it. I hope you have a copy of that. Do you all have a copy? I sent, I think, to most of you. And secondly, I would like to get it to be the case that we have a funding idea in place so that we can manage the funding for doing some of these things, provided you believe it's worthwhile to do it. Okay, obviously this is going to be something you have to judge. I think the reason for doing a partial lake advisory is justifiable because it potentially could allow people to continue lake activities in a safe way and not close down the whole show for a bloom that is limited. Now, that being the case, I would also ask to consider having GZA help us to manage this and to work out some sort of contractual relationship with them to do that. So I'm asking you to look at the idea of helping me to get some funds to do this. And I'm asking you to help me to get on board with a contract with the town for GZA to help us out with this. And I think Dr. Burpee can help us out to go forward with that also. Now, does everybody have a copy of that decision tree that I sent out? Does anybody not have it? Michael
I
doesn't have
could
it.
not find it, Charlie.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, well, let me see what I can do. I don't think I
Share.
don't know how to do that stuff that they do, you know, where they put it up on the screen or anything like that. So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to read down and go over it with you and sort of look at the basic ideas.
Hey, Charlie, can you resend it?
I just resent it to everybody, so.
Oh, did you?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, it's being resent. Thanks, Charlie.
And Charlie, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Is there a pattern that one could follow? Maybe Dr. Burpee would know the answer to that. I mean, so that we've only had, to the best of my knowledge, one highly toxic cyanobacteria outbreak on the lake. And I'm not sure how much we learned from that. I mean, we learned a lot from that, but did we learn enough to be able to predict where we might be able to try and contain it so that we could continue activities in other parts of the lake? Do we know that?
Okay, so let me just explain it, Sally, a little bit, and then you can ask that question again if I haven't answered what your question, which is a very good question. But what we're about here is to actually set up that pattern. In other words, and I'll fill it in. I think you're going to find from what Dr. Burpee says that he is working. He does have actually a statistical analysis program. I don't understand it completely, but it seems like a kind of a reverse Monte Carlo simulation. You know, the Monte Carlo simulation, in order to, you plug in variables and you look for an outcome based on those variables. It seems as though Dr. Burpee's system goes the other way around and identifies variables that are the most relevant and then selects for those to test. But I'll let him explain that to you. But first of all, the first issue, of course, is deciding, do we have a bloom that we can manage in the way that we're thinking about? That's the first thing. So that if we decide we don't have a bloom that we can manage, we can just simply do what the DPH already recommends that we do. And our fallback position is simply to issue a whole lake advisory and do the usual thing. That's what we would do. You're right, we don't have a lot of experience with this, so we're going to fudge this a little bit. And the Stockbridge Bowl may have peculiarities because of the hard water lake that don't extrapolate to other lakes. But I think the key thing, first of all, is to decide, do we have a manageable bloom? Dr. Burpee will weigh in on it. It's not just something that's related to size, but it also may have to do with dispersal in the water column and other things. it is a significant part of the protocol to identify whether or not we actually have a manageable bloom. And if we think we do, what we have in the protocol that we're looking at, the decision tree that we have, a feedback check and balance system that tells us as we're going along, are we making a mistake calling this a manageable bloom? And should we just go to the fallback position of using the whole lake advisory as the DPH recommends? And in fact, the decision tree has a couple of what I call exit points. There are places where if we become uncertain about whether we're managing it well, or if it seems like it's turning around in another way. And even as it's possible that we may have a bloom that seems to be, let's say, down by the outlet, but it came up from the middle of the lake in the middle of the night and was blown down there. And there may be some more stuff coming up in the middle of the lake all the time. And we would be looking at that idea too. Any of these potential failure points simply put us into the exit point of going back to the whole lake bloom, which we know how to do that because the DPH has very specific guidelines. So I think that's a very good question. That is going to be one of the things we're going to figure out. And I think Dr. Burpee can explain that a little bit more, but this will be a process. If we find we have a bloom that's a positive bloom and we think we can contain it, we're going to try to do something like what we did before when we had something that turned out not to be a cyanobacteria bloom. It was a real algal bloom, but Gary Kleinerman put out ropes and markers to isolate it. And what we would seek to do then is to select a certain number of perimeter points slightly outside of the boundary that we're isolating it at. We haven't decided yet how far away from the bloom that we put the markers. All of these things are details that need to be worked out, but we would be testing around the bloom on a regular basis. Now, Dr. Burpee is going to explain what an elicit test is for doing this, and it would allow us to do something relatively cheaply and on a daily basis to look at whether or not we have toxins from the cyanobacteria on the outside of the perimeter. And as soon as we would do that, we would either open up the perimeter further or exit to the whole lake advisory. We would use certain kinds of information to select the perimeter testing points. So, for example, Michael Nathan had a very good idea at the last time to get a drone to look over the bloom, which we did, and it showed it very clearly. If we did that on a serial basis, let's say a daily basis, we could look at where the bloom was drifting with the wind and predict, for example, where the surface water might go, where the germs might be, and select a perimeter point that would be appropriate to that particular analysis. We would also look at currents and the way we know the lake currents go. I am not familiar with any current map. Gary, are you, or is anybody else familiar with that?
No.
Well, this would be something that we would have to learn potentially as we go along. And then another idea would be to put a perimeter point. Let's say if we take that original false bloom, that fire alarm drill that we had a couple of years ago, we would put a perimeter point between that boundary and the town beach, for example, because that's a very important point that we don't want to see any leakage from. So we'd be checking that. So setting up these perimeter checkpoints would be an important part of it. And we would be following the regular DPH protocol of testing the stuff on the inside of the boundaries as they prescribe. So at this point, what I would say is that there is not an extant protocol such as what I'm talking about. I think we have a capable set of collaborators in GCA to help us to actually implement this. And from talking to Dr. Burpee, I think that it sounds like it's a manageable kind of an idea. It doesn't necessarily, and in fact, at this stage, doesn't involve any kind of barriers as I was originally foreseeing, although that eventually could be necessary if we don't find we can manage it the way we're talking about. But I do think that this is something that is a reasonable thing to be done. And I think if we put it together, well, we can pass it up to the DPH, and hopefully Logan Bailey will give us a green flag on it, and we can potentially, use it on a regular basis. It may even be manageable with other lakes. So with this, I'd like to pass the baton to Dr. Burpee, who's joined us. He's a limnologist, I think from GZA. He's a project manager. Ben, do you want to take the microphone there?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Kenny. I mean, you covered it really well. So currently, as Charlie explained, there's kind of like a one size fits all management solution to cyanobacteria blooms. But the fact of the matter is that cyanobacteria blooms are not always the same. They're in fact pretty diverse. And so in my mind, there's two kind of main types. There's the type that will turn your whole water column green. And then there's kind of the surface accumulations, the kind of scum forming cyanobacteria blooms that can in fact be very patchy and very localized and routinely transported to different areas of the lake, really depending mainly on predominant wind direction. And when I've seen it occur at Stockbridge, it tends to kind of accumulate on the southern end of the lake. So that, I mean, as Charlie explained, it's like, does it warrant a beach closure, or does it warrant health department postings if you're only seeing cyanobacteria and one small portion of the lake, and the rest of the lake is relatively clear and healthy and able to support recreational activities. So I really like his idea. I mean, I would say in our line of work, I would say that most of the time, what we're seeing for cyanobacteria blooms fall into the category of these kind of patchy, localized cyanobacteria scums that tend to kind of accumulate in one corner of the lake. And so I'm excited for this this project because I think it has a lot of applicability, of course, in Stockbridge Bowl, but I think it has some wider implications as well for Massachusetts and other New England states. And just to say, like in the past decade, really, but especially in the past few years, there's been some significant advances in monitoring technology, specifically for cyanobacteria blooms, as they've gained a lot of coverage in the press, as people have become a lot more aware of them. And there are some methods and techniques available to monitor cyanobacteria blooms on a very rapid, very easy, very relatively like affordable way. So traditionally, the way to monitor cyanobacteria bloom is to collect a sample. You send that sample to the lab. They're going to count the algae for you, identify the algae, report the results to you, and they're going to do a lab analysis of the various cyanobacteria toxins and report those results to you. It's very time intensive. It's very labor intensive, and you'll be lucky if you get your results like a week after the bloom disperses. So what we have available now are an array of techniques that are maybe not as quantitative as those laboratory methods, but highly useful and able to kind of identify whether you have a cyanobacteria bloom on your hands or if it's something else, perhaps green algae, or maybe it's cyanobacteria, but perhaps just not at a level that's particularly concerning. Stockbridge Bowl has already invested in a piece of equipment. It's a fluorometer, and it identifies cyanobacteria pigments. So that's kind of the first thing that I think this approach hinges on. So you already have that at your disposal. What that allows you to do is just gather a cuvette of water and put it in the fluorometer And based on the readings that you get from that instrument, you instantaneously know whether you have a cyanobacteria bloom on your hand or not. What that's going to allow you to do is perform the monitoring for this approach, which I think is going to be not labor intensive, but if you're wanting to know, how quickly this bloom is moving around your lake and if it's being contained to a certain area or not, I imagine you're going to want to do something like daily monitoring of these things. So that instrument makes that very easy for a volunteer to do. The other thing that Dr. Kenny mentioned is the ELISA tests. So again, analysis of toxins can be prohibitively expensive sometimes. It's not an easy analysis. But they have something like ELISA tests that are very easy, very affordable. There's something similar to like a COVID test, and they've come a long way. When they first came out, it would simply give you a yes or no whether or not toxins were detected. Now they are they claim to be quantitative. I always think of them as kind of semi-quantitative. They'll give you kind of a range of toxin concentration, but they're able to identify whether you have concerning amounts of toxins on your hands or not. And if you do, you can then perhaps go to the more expensive, more time-intensive analysis to quantify exactly what you have and how much of it. So just to say, there are some methods that I think that are really going to support this approach, as long as there's a volunteer at Stockbridge Bowl who's kind of willing to do this. And I think there is. So yeah, I mean, the other thing I just want to point out is that we have multiple years of data in studying cyanobacteria at Stockbridge Bowl, and we know the cyanobacteria dynamics pretty well at this point, and how they kind of form, where they form, and concentrate in the lake, and how that plays out throughout the season. And so what I would say is that Stockbridge Bowl, in my mind, is kind of more vulnerable to these patchy, localized cyanobacteria accumulations. And that's largely because of the types of cyanobacteria that are growing in Stockbridge Bowl. You tend to get deep layers of cyanobacteria down in the water column, and GZA has reported on this repeatedly, kind of year after year. We find it kind of fascinating, so we kind of honed in on it as soon as we started studying Stockbridge Bowl in the first year. You get this deep layer of cyanobacteria, which really do grow to concentrations of concerning concentrations, bloom densities. But the thing is, they're 6 meters down in the water column, maybe even deeper. They're not going to come into contact with anybody who's doing any sort of regular recreational activity, boating, water skiing, fishing, what have you. So they're not really a concern. But what happens is if you get lake turnover at the end of the season, or due to a storm event, the water column will turn over, will mix, and it will kind of capture those deep growing cyanobacteria, and it will bring them up to the surface. It will interrupt their kind of buoyancy regulation, and it will bring them up to the surface where they become entrained. It's a very transient type of cyanobacteria accumulation. I even hesitate to call it a bloom because they're not actively, usually not actively reproducing at that point, but you can get pretty concerning looking scums and patches at the surface of the lake. So just to say, like, I think this approach that Charlie is putting forward is I think a good one, and I'm rather excited about it. So I don't know, Charlie, is there anything I can elaborate on other than that?
Well, I haven't found anybody doing the same thing. There's a lot of data points that we're going to have to look at. The the movement of the germs and the toxins, I think, are going to be cyanobacteria specific. But as you said, if it's really not a bloom, but it's a movement event, probably it's going to be confined to the time period of that movement event. We don't have to be worried about a whole bunch of other stuff coming up. That's the first thing I would think. And then we'd be able to, I think it would be good to initially identify the specific toxins that we're dealing with, because each has a different longevity, especially in light. And the diffusion of these things hasn't been, if you're sitting in a jar, you can look at diffusion, but I think diffusion is probably is an idea that's secondary to the wind blowing the stuff around, and maybe currents. But that's another thing that the testing will eventually show us.
Yep.
So I consider this to be a project that has several stages to it. The first stage is first we want to be completely protected, so that if we want to identify all of our uncertainty points, so that if we reach a point of uncertainty, we do a whole lake advisory. That would be one of the things I would want to present to the Board of Health, which I'm going to do eventually, and make sure that they understand that this is going to be protected that way. Secondly, we're going to be learning what we already know we have oscillatoria most of the time. I think that'll probably be the cyanobacteria that we're looking at, and that's a late season event most of the time. But we had a problem with the Josh Billings once, and I would like to see that we could be documenting this in such a way that eventually we might even be predictive, using your statistical analysis, potentially some of the programs you're talking about, that we might be predictive and be able to do something like Sally Underwood Miller was questioning in the very beginning, and is, where is this going to go? What do we have to worry about? What's going to be the expectation? Right now, because we have such limited experience with these things, I do not think that we're going to be able to be predicting it all. But I would think that if we make a good database and we proceed with this, that we're going to see, I want to be ready. I don't want to have the event occur and then once again be, stuck, with a whole lake advisory that we potentially didn't need to have. And that's that. And I think eventually we'll get to know the stuff eventually. Maybe if we're lucky, we won't learn anything because we won't have any blooms, and that'd be very nice. But I don't want to be unprepared. And I think this is a way to be prepared. I think that the benefits are, as I see it, that we can allow a lot of lake activities go on. During the cyanobacteria bloom that we had a couple of years ago, I went around to different lakes in Massachusetts. I saw different blooms. Some of them were very localized and surface scums, and others seemed to just be the whole water was green, and it didn't look like anybody would want to go in anywhere. So I think that is another, that's going to be something that we're going to gain experience with eventually. But anyway, I think we should do this. That's what I think. Just a question of figuring out all the details. So I'd like to ask the Stockbridge Bowl Stewardship Commission, do you guys have any questions about this?
Tom?
Hi, Tom Finan. I appreciate the presentation. I have a couple questions. One is, we're talking about studying rare events. And so the issue with studying rare events is that they're rare and you don't get much option to collect the data. So this is not going to help us for the next 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 blooms. It's going to help.
I disagree with that.
Right.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to,
So that's one issue is, are we going to be able to collect?
So what I see is that this is this decision tree and protocol will modify itself as we gain more experience. That the initial setup for the thing will be predicated on the idea that we have very little experience, and we are going to have very highly sensitive inspection of what I call these exit points. When we're going to have to leave the protocol and just say we're closing the whole lake down. This is the kind of thing that I think we can set up a system that will assure that we've got a safe situation. And if we have a small surface bloom this season. And well, we won't have the thing in place this season. We need the DPH to look over everything. But let's say we have a small surface bloom next year, we can implement the protocol right away. And we'll be testing the protocol. It will be testing itself as we go along, and we'll be protecting people if we have a small bloom with this protocol, I believe, in a safe way, so that we can justify people doing things in other parts of the lake. And we'll be managing it with the decision tree so that if we go outside of our certainty limits, we'll close everything down and just close the lake.
I guess
It will take effect right away. Improve with time.
I understand that, but I think in terms of public health, do you really want to implement a protocol that's untested when the consequences could be someone getting sick? My related question is, given the size of the lake, which is small, are these blooms going to be of a size? Does it make any sense to close down part of the lake?
Can I comment?
I just don't know that.
Let me comment a little bit on.
And given the prevailing winds, which tend to blow all the stuff down to the beach, which is where you're going to be most concerned. I don't know if it makes any sense to think about this.
Dr. Burby has commented that the testing capability is available in two methods.
Right.
One is a dipstick similar to the one made by our gyrus, comes in kits, and you can get the response in an hour. That enables you to test the water to see if a toxin is present. Right now, I think it only tests for microcystins, which is a predominant toxin. So in theory, you could isolate an area and test areas of water nearby, which is what Charlie is suggesting, and say there is toxin present or there's no toxin present. If the toxin is not present, that area of the lake is safe. There's a more elaborate ELISA assay. That's the one that takes 2 or 3 days. You have to ship it to a lab. It's like a blood chemistry. It's this fancy blood, right? It's fancy test. Right. So you know so the antigen antibody test in the strip is now available for the top. So this is doable, but the issue that you're raising is this is a science project,
Right.
which requires resources, but not necessarily, it's theoretically possible to do as citizen science. Where if you have, I don't know how much I know that the ELISA assay costs $150. You can ship it to Auburn, you can ship it to California, Washington. The strips, I don't know how much they cost. I didn't price it out, but they're not going to be that expensive. So it's possible to have a protocol in place that's not going to be very expensive, that allows you not necessarily to close down the entire lake, which is, I think, the point.
Right, no, I agree. I have a question, given the size of the lake, and the only bloom I've ever seen here was the one that happened a couple of years ago, which affected
18.
Yeah, 18 was. Does the benefit of doing that outweigh the risk of people getting sick?
Okay, so Louis, thank you for coming in. I certainly want you to understand that we don't intend to be reckless about this.
I understand.
So
Protocol makes sense.
yeah, I understand it. Secondly, I think that it's the Stewardship Commission's prerogative, and this is why I'm bringing this to you in the first place, because it isn't the Board of Health's decision. The Board of Health will simply close the whole lake down. We don't have any problem with that. That is standard procedure at the present time. But just to bring things into place, before I even initiated this kind of conversation with you, I did speak with Logan Bailey, who's the Massachusetts Department of Public Health's man in charge of cyanobacteria bloom management. And I spoke with government officials in 3 other states and academic officials. They all think this is a doable idea. It is the case that in lakes all around the country, but particularly in New York State, I know this absolutely, in Wisconsin, they only close off part of the lake where they have the bloom, and they eyeball it. They look at the bloom, and they historically have not had any problems from that. So what I'm suggesting doing is something like the eyeball idea, if it's possible. We have to define what's a manageable bloom. But in addition to doing that, going way beyond what these other states already allowed to be done, and test the perimeter on a regular basis to make sure that we're not doing exactly what you're stating or afraid of. Now, whether or not this is worthwhile to be done is your decision. Okay, that's really your decision, because you're in charge of the Stockbridge Bowl. And the Stockbridge Bowl, the one aspect of it is the safety. And the Board of Health is very willing to just be totally conservative, not go out at all and do anything else. It's very simple for us to do it. But what I'm offering you is, from my own research and from what my own knowledge is a very reasonable possibility that if we have a localized bloom, such as I think Dr. Burpee would agree with me, is a really highly likely kind of bloom that we can have, that we might be able to do something so that a lot of people can still enjoy the lake safely. And if you think that's worth it, that's what I'm asking you to think about.
Charlie, the last, when was it, 2018?
18.
When the last bloom was, what, was that localized? Was that in several places in the lake? Was it in?
Well, we didn't look at it that way, Don. If we had done what Michael Nathan had suggested doing at the last boom and flown over a drone, we might have been able to decide. And there are other tests too, such as, Dr. Burpee was suggesting that, we have to look at the water column. We could have done surveillance in other areas, but to tell you the truth, I don't know.
Where
What
was
happened
it?
is
Everywhere.
the first.
Everywhere.
It seemed to be pretty widespread to me, but we didn't do the kind of surveillance that I think is necessary to make that kind of decision for us. But if we have a widespread bloom like that, again, it's very simple. We don't do any testing or anything like that other than the DPH protocol, and the Board of Health will do that.
I think the thing that was surprising about that particular event was that I'm not a scientist, but I'm a visual person. And I first observed the cyanobacteria on the west side of the lake, on the northwest side of the lake. And given the prevailing winds, which almost always come from the west, I would assume that it would blow anything that was on the surface, at least, toward the other side of the lake, toward the east side of the lake, and possibly the southeast side of the lake. And that did not seem to happen. I know that people noticed that the geese would not go in the lake up by Tanglewood, and people's dogs that were in Gould Meadows would not go in the lake. And so to me, that was sort of counterintuitive as to how it responded.
But it ended up on the other side of the lake.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
But the technology now is pretty simple to monitor this.
Right.
So you send up a drone and every day look at what the distribution is. So I think the idea is to really understand, because this is going to keep happening.
Yes.
It's not going, that's the reality.
Trees is another question. How do you prevent it?
That's
Mike, would you
a
like to
separate
speak?
one. That's a biggie.
Yeah. Michael has a question, Charlie?
When we had that bloom, do you remember what month? Was that in September?
Yeah, because it was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Josh.
August 28th.
August 28th?
Yeah.
Right. So another thing that I was thinking of is taking, once it becomes a certain percentage of the lake, it becomes automatically, you can't go in. In other words, as a criteria of
Well, I would do it more pragmatically rather than looking at percentage. What I would say is can we mark it off safely and
Yeah.
do testing in a way so that obviously that's sort of saying the same thing as you, but I would define it as what we can't do this, and then we have to do a whole lake advice.
So this question is to Ben and to you. What are the odds of having a bloom are generally in the fall, like end of summer to the fall?
No.
Is that when it generally takes place?
Well, with oscillatoria, that tends to be the case, but as I think that would be usually the case. Yes.
All right. So what I'm saying is that's when it's least fall comes, it's least used. In other words, the lake is least used. At the time when we had the bloom, we were very fortunate that we had the whole summer almost to use it. And at the end was when the bloom came, where if people couldn't use it, it wasn't the end of the world of using the lake. So,
Unless you were a part of the Josh Billings.
oh, yeah, well, that's true.
Oh, yeah, it's a matter of opinion.
Huge, huge problem.
Yeah, but I think if you have anything like this, you're gonna warn the Josh Billings
Well,
to make a
It's a big-
decision.
yeah, I don't
It's
mean-
huge. The
But
Josh.
it was, I mean, my husband has been on the Josh Billings Committee forever and ever. I was the director of the Josh for 4 years. Trying to change the Josh at the last minute because there's a cyanobacteria took Herculean effort.
Yeah, but I'm
to
just
do.
saying, but even if, what I'm trying to say is if we use Charlie's, let's say it comes into fruition, that Charlie's idea is doable or is agreed to and he can separate it. There's only two choices. Either the Josh Billing can go forward or they can't.
Right, correct.
I mean, so it's not like it would change anything.
Right.
With what Charlie is doing for the Josh Billings.
But it also wouldn't make any difference if it were one part of the lake or another part of the lake because the Josh uses. the
Yes,
whole
but he
lake.
won't
Yeah.
know that. You won't know that until the bloom comes into
Right.
place.
Correct.
Well, I have to say that it was the Josh Billings in particular that inspired me to begin thinking about this. And I have talked to a number of people on the board of the Josh about this. And the goal here would be partly to protect the Josh or to allow the Josh to continue in such a way that, you know, they would understand where they could go and where they couldn't go in a safe way. And that's actually one of the inspirations for the idea, is to protect it. I felt very badly about the Josh. I always think of the Josh as a high point of the end of the end of the season. And that I knew there are a lot of people that like it. It's a wonderful activity and inspires a whole lot of people. And I wanted to do the best I could. I felt so badly on being in a position of having to tell them they couldn't do it. So what I'm trying to set up here is something so that I can tell them they can do it.
So what I'm saying, Charlie, is also it's the decision of the select board, I would imagine, to decide whether they close it down or not, right? Or no?
No, it is not. This is a board.
Not?
Board of Health.
I thought you said it's the Board of Health, you would right away.
The Board of Health is the one.
Maybe I misunderstood you.
We're delegated by the Department of Public Health to issue advisories for cyanobacteria blooms. And what I'm doing in conjunction with the Department of Public Health, and as I told you, I spoke to Logan Bailey, who's in charge of all of this, and he likes the idea of moving forward with this to get it under control, is to do something to advance the idea of how to manage it in situations such as the Stockbridge Bowl, where we might have a localized bloom. Now, you know, as has been said, you know, we have a lot of experience with this, and we might have a localized bloom, let's say next year. But if we don't have anything in place, then all we can do is close the whole lake down. And that's what we can do. What I'm trying to offer is the possibility by setting up, it's a little bit of an effort, an organizational problem to get this in place, to be able to do it. But, and it may not be usable, but if a situation like this comes up, then if we have it in place, then we can move forward with this. And especially, I wouldn't go forward with it or do anything until I had the Board of Health behind me on it and the Department of Public Health of Massachusetts behind me. So I would make sure that that's all in place first. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to make a pretty good proposal to Logan Bailey with a lot of scientific background about it so that we don't do something in a reckless way. I'm not worried about the science of it, because if I don't think that we've got it under control, I'm not going to do it. What I'm asking you to figure out, and I don't think this is my decision, although I'll respond to your questions just to clarify things, is do you think it's worth it to the community? If we have a localized bloom and we can let the Josh happen, for example, as opposed to closing the whole lake down and telling them to do it somewhere else, is that a worthwhile thing to do? That's your decision. I think it is, but, and I did speak to some of the board of directors of the Josh, and they think it is. But I'll leave it up to you to figure this out as a Stockbridge Falls Stewardship Commission, because I think that's your role, is to manage the decisions about what might be done to help out. It's the Board of Health's decision to decide to issue a whole lake advisory or a partial lake advisory. It's our decision.
Charlie, are you going to give us specific proposals you want us to act on, or are you going to make some suggestions, or would you like us to generate our own reaction and our own proposals? I mean, you're saying obviously there's going to be some funding. Obviously, there's going to be a few other things that you would want us to recommend or to propose to the select board. I mean, is that, how do you want us to proceed, I guess, is my next
I
step.
think the first thing, okay, I know exactly what I would like you to do.
Good.
First of all, I'd like you to decide amongst yourselves whether you think this is a worthwhile idea. That's the first idea. Secondly, if you decide it is a worthwhile idea, then what I'll do is I'll propose to you, I'll get together with GZA, with Dr. Burpee, and I'll work with the Department of Public Health, and I'll work with other academics and governments, the state government officials in the different states, and put together a proposal for what we would do and how we would do it. It involved potentially drones, it involved testing, it involved training somebody to go out to get the samples, to bring them back. I think that the Tri-Town Health Department could actually do some of the testing, but that would be on shore rather than a boat or something like that to gather the samples, I would imagine. But I don't know the details of that exactly. But I'll get that together and I'll make a very specific set of proposals to you. But I'm going to, if you're interested in it, going to ask you as the commission, if you think this is a worthwhile project, to go and get some funds so that we can do it.
Now, or do you want to do it at
I
another
think our
time?
next
That's
meeting,
what I would ask.
because that way we can think about it and then
Okay.
discuss it.
You want to say that?
So Charlie, does it sound reasonable that we, at our next meeting, discuss it as a group and then invite you to the following meeting? Or is that too long?
Well, what you can do if you would like is when you plan to discuss it, if you want, I'll be very happy to be there. If you'd like
Okay.
to discuss it without me, that's fine too.
Because
But
our next meeting is August 8th.
No.
September.
September.
I mean,
September.
September, sorry.
It's September.
I think
said
the 12th.
well, if you wouldn't mind, if you're gonna.
Wait, hold on.
Latest 12.
I won't be able to do it until October, okay? But as I said, I think this is going to be a year project. I have to get a lot of stuff together. We have to present it to DPH eventually. I have to present it to the Board of Health. But if you wouldn't mind putting this on the agenda in October, I could have myself prepared to discuss with you the various things. And in fact, if you wouldn't mind, I might speak with some of the Luo Gianni, some of the other people on the board of directors and people related to the insurance of the Stockbridge Bowl who might, Tim Minkler, I don't know who they've got for that now, but basically to make sure that the different people that might be interested in this, you might look at the Mackinac Boat Club. I don't know who you would think would be interested, or if you want to invite anybody else to do it, or you just want to do it yourself. But I'll be very happy to discuss this with anybody, to look at that idea to help you to decide if you think it's worth doing.
All right. So our first October meeting would be the 10th.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Ben. Any other questions?
No, our next meeting is September 12th.
Yeah, for us.
For us.
All right, thank you. Well, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie.
Yes, I guess.
So-
Under
Thank you,
recreation.
Ben. Ben, thank you for coming.
Yeah, so I think
Thank you,
we'll,
Ben.
because that way, we can all think about it, do some homework, and then talk about the 12th. But Charlie can come back October 10th.
I need to
Having the
get
meeting
that.
on the 26th also,
Are we
right?
having two meetings
You
in
sent it
September?
to,
Mhm.
Oh,
Don, you got it. It was sent to your Yahoo email.
I think we
Sent
go
to your
to
Yahoo
one,
email.
but,
Yahoo? Okay,
Not the Stockbridge post.
Two in September and then after that it's one.
yeah, until
It's
this.
sent on 8/18.
okay.
So it'll be the second Thursday of the month, starting in
Which is the-
October.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the
Just so I
10th in
know what we're
October
doing.
and the 12th and the
All right.
26th.
I move that the
in
meeting be
September.
adjourned.
Second, anyone want a
Let me
second?
answer your question, Don. When you send, yeah, to Don, because you send the minutes